Welcome once again to the Chapter 49 podcast. It's always great to have you with us for another week. We try to keep this weekly, and in recent months, we have actually done that. Actually, ever since the Christmas season, we've had these podcasts as a weekly feature. My name is Larry Lannan. I'm a volunteer with Chapter 49 and a retiree. I mostly do communications, and my biggest responsibility is producing this podcast and trying to get Duncan Giles scheduled, which can be a challenge sometimes, but Duncan is with us as always. Great to have you back, Duncan.
Good to be here as always, Larry.
And I have to tell you, we are now in that season of the year when the heat is on. We have people listening all over, but in Indiana and a big part of the eastern part of the United States, there's a huge heat dome, and we have had a heat wave going on. We'll have a bit of a respite for a few days, and it'll be back on again next week. We are, of course, recording this on the 17th of June, which is a Friday. So, Duncan, how do you try to keep cool when the heat wave sets in?
Just praying that the air conditioning wherever I'm at is continuing to work and not break down. That's about the best you can do.
Well, you did have a crisis at your home earlier, but that was averted, I understand.
Yes, a couple of weeks ago had some HVAC issues, but I got those fixed. And I just feel for folks who I know are having HVAC issues. It's extremely tough in this heat to have to deal with that.
And, we keep hearing these reports that there's a shortage of electric capacity and we could have rolling blackouts. Now, I'm told that before that, if we don't know if it'll happen, if these, very warm temperatures persist, it could. We are told that people will get a heads up and will know before these rolling blackouts start. So let's hope that does not impact any of the people who are watching and listening. That would not be an easy thing to deal with. Also, I'll say one other thing. Where I live here in the central part of Indiana, we have had a spate of drowning incidents. We've had some deaths due to drowning. You really have to be careful. It's a time of year to get in the water, and getting in the water is a great thing, and it is a wonderful way to cool off. Please be safe, and if you're not sure what all the safety measures are, check with all of your local authorities. They all have plenty of good information on that. So if you have a pool without a lifeguard, and a lot of them don't, if you have small ones particularly, if you're in a lake nearby where you live, just make sure you are being as careful as you can and following all the safety procedures. Because we like to keep our people who are watching and listening, we like to keep them back and have them back next week if they choose to join us. With that in mind, Duncan, let's get into our issues. And we have some good news. We're always glad to have good news.
Absolutely.
And we have some very good news for people who have been volunteering to help with this huge backlog of paper inventory at the submission processing centers. People in other functions all around the country, including toll-free sites, are starting to work this inventory. What good news do we have?
Yeah, basically what has come to an agreement for everyone who has is in accounts management or submission processing, they should be getting a special act award for their work on the surge of $1,000 before taxes. I always like to add that before taxes. That I think is very well deserved, because this has been a very tough, couple of years for everybody, but especially the folks in answering the phones or dealing with the paper. It's just it never stops. And with all the different things we've had, economic payments, advanced child care, credit payments, the phone volume has increased, the paper volume has increased, and we just don't have enough bodies to take care of it. So I think it's a great, great thing that the folks in those divisions are being, parts of W&I are being given a special act award.
It's really interesting that people who work for the IRS have to be reminded that this is before taxes, but we want to be clear on that. Now, do we know when these payments will be made?
Yes, sometime before the next ice age. No, in actuality, because they have to be manual payments, it's going to be sporadic and spread out. So someone sitting across from you may get theirs next pay period, and yours may not come for 5 pay periods. We just don't know exactly. IRS is going to work to do what we understand is going to work to do them as expeditiously as possible, but we don't know, exactly when there will be, but we do know it will not be uniform.
Yeah, and we still don't have every single detail about this, and you and I will try to do our best to keep everyone posted on this weekly podcast and also at our Facebook page, NTEU Chapter 49 Indiana on Facebook. And if you have trouble finding it, just check with Duncan Giles. He'll send you a link, or if you want to just send it through the general email system and not the internal IRS email system, our email for Chapter 49 outside the IRS internal system is nteu49@aol.com. Send an email there, and if you're having trouble finding our Facebook page, Duncan will be glad to send you a link, and you can access us on a regular basis. And Duncan, our top 2 stories are probably top 3 stories are pretty good news. The second story we want to talk about has to do with a raise. Now, it may not be as much as everyone wants. And as we've talked about on previous podcasts, fair or not, federal employee pay raises have rarely actually kept up with the actual cost of living. But we are getting a bigger raise than we've had in recent years. The House Appropriations Committee, which is the starting point for these sorts of measures, has already passed a 4.6% federal employee raise for 2023. It now goes to the House floor, and if it passes there, it goes on to the Senate. And we'll keep an eye on how this progresses. But it is good news that at least I know that NTU has wanted a 5.1% increase. That's not totally out of the ballpark, but right now it's 4.6.
Yeah, it is good news. And like you said, Larry, it's not keeping up with inflation, but with the congressional makeup the way that it is, this is quite an accomplishment to get it out of the Appropriations Committee in the House. We are trying to work to get the 4.6 being the base pay and then locality pay added on to it. So contact your congressperson or your senator to ask them for their support in that. But yeah, this is something that could help everyone. So we urge, all of our viewers, all of our listeners, all their families to, contact the representatives and senators to let them know how much they would like this raise and, if possible, increase it.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting that we've done this before the podcast, and I know people come in and out, don't necessarily watch or listen every week, or just recently joined us. There is a big difference between the increase that goes to retirees and the increase that goes to federal employees. Federal employees have to have legislation. It's a decision of Congress and the president as to how much of a raise, how much goes to locality, how much to across the board, and so forth. That's a decision of the Congress, and the president is involved in that as well. When it comes to retirees, Duncan, that is a specific formula that is tied to the inflation rate. Now, some people don't think it's tied to the inflation rate the way it should be, but they are 2 completely different systems. Retirees, it's an automatic system based on an economic model. Is that not correct?
Absolutely correct. And that's one of the things that when I have people, when the cost of living raise is higher than the raise that federal employees get, I use one of my favorite sayings is, are you trying to bring logic into an argument with the federal government? You should know better than that. You've been around a little bit, because it is 2 different things. And any time that you have something that has to be voted on by elected officials, that's always a wild card. We don't know when or how it will go. So I'm glad the retirees have something that's automatic and don't have to go through this process.
And I should point out, as a person who retired about 10 years ago, for many years, the retiree raise was much lower than the federal employee raise. Now it's kind of turned around, but what goes around comes around. So there have been years where retirees got a better deal, and there have been years where employees get a better deal. So We just have to, like you said, what's logic got to do with it? Well, not much, unfortunately. There was another action that was tied to that House committee, and that has to do with the IRS budget. There's a very encouraging sign on funding, agency funding for the IRS. What do we know about that, Duncan?
Yeah, it looks like that they've increased the budget about $1 billion, and they are setting the vast majority of that to go to taxpayer service and to enforcement. So that would mean to hire, more people on the phones, more people in the service centers, more revenue officers, more revenue agents, which are all desperately needed. It's a great sign that we have that. We just have to make sure that we can make the jobs as attractive as possible so people do want to come and work here. Because right now, even with the employment market loosening up a little bit, it's still very tight, and we're still having trouble attracting people. So hopefully this will help with that effort as well.
And I think it's early to tell. We don't know what the final budget's going to be and how it all comes up. But we also, on top of all that, which everything you said was absolutely correct, we still have to make sure the Congress funds our continued efforts to improve our information technology systems, which continue to be totally outdated, right?
As I like to say, we have the finest of 1990s technology. It's just one of those things where, and the reason being is there is an actual logical reason for it. Most companies, when they say we're going to go with a new updated system, they can shut down for whatever time period they need, a couple of weeks, a month, or 2 months for certain things, so they can inlay that. Ours, we can't do that at all. We have to overlay it over existing systems and have them run darn near simultaneously. So it's a very painstaking process, not easy at all, and it causes us to, take much more time than we would like to. Because I know the IT folks would love to deal with stuff that's much, much newer, much easier to deal with. But right now they have to, keep up the old while implementing the new, and that's extremely difficult.
Yeah, the old saying was we're trying to actually renovate the airplane while it's in flight. And
that's a great analogy.
Yeah, I've heard that for years. And I think that tells the story of the IRS and our information technology. It's actually a longer story than that. We won't get into that, but at least some progress is being made. There has been another item that's, I think, good news for some people. I'm not sure how many people in Indiana will be able to take advantage of this, but since we have some people nationwide that do consume this podcast, either watching or listening, there is a new agreement that IRS and NTEU have entered into, and it's about voluntary relocations, where if you want to change your POD from one to another, there are some complications there, some details I want you to talk about. So what does this program mean in practical terms to people working for IRS, this voluntary relocation program?
Yeah, the voluntary relocation program has been around for several years. Usually has 2 openings. They've created a new opening for folks to put in their voluntary relocation request by June 24th. And the reason they're doing that is they want to make sure that we can get folks in, if we're going to be reopening posts of duty, if we're going to be doing a switching around, now is the time to do it. The unfortunate thing is that there has to be a vacancy in that particular POD to go for that relocation. So it can be fairly limited. Your larger cities are going to have better opportunities than some of your smaller posts of duty. But nevertheless, if you're interested in switching posts of duty, I always encourage people, put in for the voluntary relocation. The worst they can tell you is no.
Yeah, and I think another complication to this is the fact that there are other provisions that can trump this. For example, if there's a hardship transfer that's been approved, they would get preference. Certain settlements of labor filings, grievances, sometimes that can trump a voluntary relocation. But it's worth a try. If something you want to do, it's worth a try. But there are no guarantees. Correct?
Exactly. And that's why I always encourage people, if this is something you want, put in for it, put in for it at every, every time that there's an uh, open opportunity to do so. And right now is one that I think that the IRS is really looking at so they can figure out where they have the people, what posted duties, that sort of thing. And it's much, much cleaner to do it now when they're getting ready to go for phase two of the evacuation order ending.
Let's move on to COVID testing. Believe it or not, that's still an issue. And there is still a testing program that is basically a government wide program. It's for COVID. And as we go back to the office, this will become more of an issue. But our national president for NTU, Tony Reardon, has sent a letter to OPM. And what is he pushing in this letter?
Yeah, basically, Tony, and I totally understand where he's coming from, is saying, you know what, we need to basically end the testing. And the reason for that is it's not that effective. When you're using the instant tests, so to speak, where they, stick a swab up your nose and see if they can get it to come out your ear by going up that far. Those are reliable, but not super reliable. So you get a lot of false positives from those. And it's just, you've also got the fact that people who have had, their COVID shots, their boosters and things of that nature can still be carriers for COVID. So Tony's basically saying, look, right now, what we've got isn't going to work. It isn't working. Let's stop it and perhaps relook at this.
All right, so that's to be determined. OPM has not responded to Tony's letter yet, so we'll see where that goes as we move forward. There's another COVID-related issue, and this again goes back to this whole return to the office, because the key date that was put in is June 25th, although I think that's a weekend, so it's the next business day. So I would say right before the end of June. Well, we're back to the evacuation order is now gone, and we're back to the contractual situation where if you're on telework, you must come into the office 2 days out of that 2-week pay period. So we're back to that again as we head to the end of June. Now, the one issue that NTEU has recently brought up with the management is cleaning, and we've talked about this ever since COVID hit us in 2020, and the whole idea here is, well, if people must be in the office, and you had some issue processing centers and other parts of the service where people were coming into the office unable to work telework for whatever reason, and NTE worked very hard with the management to make sure we had properly cleaned offices. Well, now that people are coming back, NTEU wants more extensive and regular cleaning for this second phase of return to the office. And what's IRS response as of now?
Yeah, this one kind of puzzles me from the response, not from NTU wanting it, because I think we all would like, when you're coming back, some of these offices have not been entered into for 2 years. So, basically what NTU has talked to IRS about is, hey, you've already got your managers reporting. Why don't we start the regular cleanings now so that they can be in process? So when employees do come back in, they can come back in to clean offices. The response that we originally got was, we've taken a look at these offices. We've gone through them. We've made sure that there's no damage in them. They look okay. There's nobody basically to take care of them. So that's why we're not going to do it. We'll take a look at it. And now IRS has come back and said, no, we're not going to start regular cleaning until there are actual employees there. So they don't want to bother their managers to have this done, I guess. And there are several PODs across the country, many PODs across the country, where they don't have managers in the office. So I can, I see that, but it's like, this should be a no-brainer. Everybody should want a clean office to come back to be, regularly cleaned right now, before people start coming back under the second phase of the evacuation.
Well, yes. And, even when I've been working at various IRS offices, most of the cleaning services we had on a regular basis, let's say, we're not candidates for the Golden Mop Award. So uh, some were better than others, I will say, so it kind of depended on the local contract that you had. And now with COVID, and there is at least a possibility COVID can, in some cases, be transmitted through an office that is not cleaned up to certain standards. So I think this is going to be an ongoing issue. NTU is on it. We're not going to let up on our pressure on the management on this. And we would certainly want to hear more from our own members, people who are members of NTEU, as you see things in your workplace that don't look right in this whole area of cleaning. Let NTE, your local NTE people know, and we have a way of following up on this. So we will do the best we can on the local level, and our national union will also push this with the national management as well. But I've always found that trying to address this on the local level, Duncan, is the most effective way to do that.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. If your office is not clean or your area is not clean, needs to be vacuumed, needs to be dusted, obviously hasn't been for quite a while, put in a ticket. Put in a ERC ticket, let them know so FMSS knows that there are issues in the area, because it's not just COVID. I mean, if you've got a lot of dust out there, there are people with allergies, those sorts of things that it's just common sense that you should have a clean office. If people are being forced to come back in after working successfully from home for 2 years, the least they can come back into is a office that's regularly cleaned even before they start coming in, so they know they're coming into a good workplace.
Let's move on to another issue, and this is one you and I have talked about on numerous occasions. It came out of the renegotiated and now in place national agreement. It's a child care subsidy. Now, there are income limits, but it's mostly for the lower income employees at IRS, and there are a number of those, a subsidy for their child care expenses. And many agencies already have this. So now IRS has agreed to do this through the labor agreement with NTEU. But the original vendors that were chosen, I think IRS has admitted maybe we're not up to that massive job for a national program for child care. There's now been a revetting of all the vendors that are going to be hired to do this. So is that a good sign? Tell me where you think this child care subsidy stands right now.
Extremely frustrating. It stands from my standpoint. This is something that should have been done, by the start of the year. And for whatever reason, IRS couldn't find the right vendors, because we had heard they had a vendor selected. They were getting ready to roll out. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to revet vendors. So are they starting from scratch? We should know more in a couple of weeks. This is why NTU filed a national grievance against the IRS on this, because there's just no way it should have taken this much time. No way at all. So hopefully we're finally moving forward on this. I can tell folks who are looking for this that NTU is not only pressing for this to happen yesterday, but also that it be retroactive to the start of the year. So keep your child care receipts, things of that nature. So if you do qualify, once they finally select a vendor, that you can get these expenses reimbursed, because it's a great program. It's something the IRS readily agreed to at the table. Everybody thought it was a great idea, but implementation on something like this should not be that difficult.
We've already mentioned telework in a couple of situations we've talked about now, but there's something else on telework that we'd like to talk about. This came up at that national agreement table, and now NTU wants to push further and bring more positions into that telework listing. So tell us what's going on there.
Yeah, this is one of those things where we talked about it at the table darn near a year ago, when we were finalizing it, about the positions that could be eligible for telework. And NTU continues to believe that if you've been able to do your job successfully for 2+ years from home, there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to do frequent telework. So we're working with the IRS, trying to find different positions that are not included in the frequent telework list to expand that. And I think we're going to be having some success eventually. Now, how long eventually is going to take, we don't know. But it's something that we're really working towards because it's, again, a no-brainer. If you've been doing it for a couple of years, why shouldn't you be able to continue doing it?
Are there any specific positions that NTU is targeting, or is it or we're just looking for the longest list we can find?
There's a laundry list of positions that are out there.
Okay, Duncan is just frozen on us now, and unfortunately, we know this is an occasional problem, and we're hoping that he comes back here shortly. But right now, he is he is now in a frozen position. Duncan, are you there?
I have been here. I could hear everything you're saying.
Yeah, I can hear you. You can hear me, but you were frozen. So go back to the start of your discussion there on the frequent telework list.
Okay. Well, first off, I think frozen is probably the best thing for me because that way you can't really see me that much. The situation on the telework is we're just pushing for every position that has successfully been able to do it during the pandemic. We feel should be on frequent telework. That's the long and short of it.
Okay, we get one other issue here, and again, Duncan is not synced up on the video, so if he's is what he says and what you're hearing it don't match up. Again, this happens now and then. Seems like it's always when there are storms in the area for some reason. We've got some storms coming in. Maybe that's we don't know for sure. We did talk about last time there's a lawsuit dealing with the OPM hack, where so many federal workers and retirees particularly had their personal information revealed in a hack of the OPM website. There has been a lawsuit that's been years in the making because this goes back to 2014 and 15. If you are an NTEU member, one of the many benefits of being a member, you receive regular emails from our national union. Tony Reardon did send out in the past week an update on this, and there is a website that's been set up at Duncan. There's still not an application process, and there's still not total clarity on who's eligible. But if you're a member, you will receive an update from our national union, and we will also update you here on this podcast. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, National NGU has been very much a part of this, even though we're not party to the lawsuit per se. But we're getting out information, and they will be sending out links to the where you have to sign up for to be party to this.
Finally, the only management official that has ever agreed to be on this podcast. And by the way, they told him he needed to have a script, which we couldn't obviously provide. If this were scripted, nobody would watch or listen, quite frankly. But he just went ahead and just took the risk of doing it anyway without permission. Andy Reitmeyer, who Duncan has worked with on a number of employee issues, dealing with surveys, follow up on surveys, particularly during I think COVID. These surveys had an added importance and allowed the management and the union to work together to solve some issues that were revealed by those surveys. Well, Andy Reitmeyer has now been awarded an assistant commissioner's award, which is a very high honor. So, Duncan, we do want to congratulate Andy.
Yeah, this was due. Andy got a commissioner's award, a deputy commissioner's award for his and his team in the engagement office, which he headed at the time, for the pulse surveys. And, whether it's Fez or Pulse or, whatever it is, I always encourage people to take these surveys because they are looked at. And if you're not happy, that's the best way to let people know. But the Pulse survey I thought was particularly good. It was, weekly, a short survey, and actually gave a pulse to what was going on. And I thought that was very well done. And I think Andy is quite deserving of getting that deputy commissioner's award for that.
Yeah, we enjoyed having Andy on the podcast. He's moved on to another job since. He's with, I think, in the criminal investigation division. So I'm sure they will receive the benefits of his extensive experience and ability. So Andy, congratulations and best of luck to you in your future endeavors. I know on our final comments, Duncan, you and I both want to talk about Juneteenth. Juneteenth just barely got on the radar as, in fact, it was a last minute day off last year because of the legislation that just passed. But President Biden made it such a priority, and it's hard to get the federal, bureaucracy to work this fast, but he got it done. The first Juneteenth holiday was last year. This is the first year we've known it was on the schedule from the beginning of the year. It is this coming Monday. Juneteenth itself is going to be on a Sunday. So this, the Monday after we record this and post it, that Juneteenth will be celebrated as a federal holiday. So maybe a few thoughts from you on as a final comment on Juneteenth.
Yeah, this is one of those things I think is very important. This for those that don't know, Juneteenth came about when the slaves in Galveston, Texas, finally learned that they were free, because Texas at that time had not really followed the rules on that. But I mean, it's just, this is the land of the free, the home of the brave, and anything that we can do to celebrate things like that, where people are freed, because slavery is an abomination and should never have been done anyway. But that's a whole nother discussion. I think it's a very worthwhile celebration, and we should embrace this.
Well, no question that slavery is a black mark on the history of America. It caused us to fight a civil war over the economic issues tied to it, and the fact that we had to fight a civil war to end slavery. And Juneteenth is an important holiday just for the reason you mentioned. It was the last slaves in America learned that they were free and were no longer slaves. So to me, that is worth celebrating. And I'm glad the Congress last year finally decided, and it took both parties, by the way, to come together to pass this legislation. We have a 50-50 Senate, so it's very difficult to get anything controversial passed. And the Juneteenth holiday was a bipartisan effort in both houses of Congress, and President Biden wasted no time signing it and putting it into effect as quickly as possible. So Juneteenth, I'm very, very happy to see that's now a federal holiday. And it is a good federal holiday. That, I think, and the Martin Luther King holiday are very important in terms of understanding the contribution that African Americans have made to this country, and I'm very happy to see it. So, anything else quickly, Duncan, before we wrap it up?
I just want to tell all the fathers out there, I hope they have a great Father's Day, and I hope everybody takes and has a good 3-day weekend. You deserve it. Relax where you can, celebrate the holiday, and be with those you love.
Yeah, and I know that I have 2 daughters, you have a daughter, and being a father, just having great kids, that's the joy of being a father. So I'm glad.
Yep.
I'm sure your daughter will give you something to make sure you feel special Sunday, and my daughters, just the fact that they are there and have grown into the wonderful adults that they have. That's all I need to know for Father's Day, and I think you feel the same way.
Exactly.
So I'm glad that we were able to make that comment and then talk about a couple of important things here at the end of the podcast. So Duncan, thank you very much for joining us again. Next week, we're not exactly sure when we'll have the podcast. Our schedules are a little dicey next week. The holiday is only part of that, but it may be a little earlier next week. But we hope to be back with our podcast again next week. It's the Chapter 49 podcast. You can find it by looking for Duncan Giles on YouTube. There's more than one. Just check with all the videos of Chapter 49 podcast, and you can subscribe to his video feed, and you'll be notified every time we have a new video podcast. On the audio side, a lot of people listen just to us on the audio side. Just go to any platform and just search under podcasts by Larry Lannan, Lannan, and you'll find all my podcasts. I produce a number of them, and the Chapter 49 podcasts are there. Thank you again for watching and listening. Great to have you. And please be safe and be kind.